The first time the security guard tried to stop me at the courthouse metal detector, I smiled like any ordinary grandmother running an errand and said, "I have nothing but a purse, dear." When the wand beeped at the old steel pen I refused to retire, he apologized. I told him not to worry. I've learned that sometimes a small noise before the main event helps everyone pay attention. Beyond the atrium glass, February in Ohio looked like a sheet of cold paper taped to the sky. I took the elevator to the 4th floor, where the hearing room smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old upholstery. When the double doors opened, conversations broke off mid-sentence. Attorneys turned, pens paused in the air. A few nurses in Navy scrubs, there to show support for the hospital, exchanged whispers they thought I couldn't hear. At the government's table, the CEO of Brookside Regional stood with his back half turned, talking to one of his lawyers. Victor Lang has the type of face that always looks like it just heard good news. He wears it the way other men wear wristwatches. His eyes slid over my son first. Daniel Hill, Maryland, walking on the unsteady courage you need when you've been falsely accused, then landed on me. For a heartbeat, Victor didn't recognize me. Then recognition hit him like a snowplow. He went pale. His smile disappeared from his face as if someone pulled the plug out of the wall. "Why are you here?" he said. Not to me exactly, but to the room, to the judge's bench, to the skylight, to any force of nature that could stop time. I kept walking, one hand on my son's forearm, one on my purse. Daniel swallowed hard. His tie wasn't sitting right. I reached up and fixed it the way I did on his first day of kindergarten and his medical school graduation and the morning of his wedding. He smiled at me, the old little boy smile, half apology, half relief. "Mom," he whispered, "you don't have to do this." "I never have to," I said. "I choose to." We sat. The clerk called the docket. When the judge took the bench, the air in the room changed. Silence grew roots. On the record, the matter was simple. The state board had an emergency petition to suspend my son's license because Brookside Regional claimed he falsified narcotics counts and diverted pain meds on overnight shifts. Along with that came a hospital termination for cause, a phrase administrators say with soft voices and clean hands. Off the record, this was about power. It always is. In a hearing like this, there's no jury, just truth, and the courage to say it out loud. The judge's nameplate read Honorable Aisha Coleman. She had a clear face, the kind of face that doesn't hide what it thinks. Good. I'm too old to perform for masks. The board attorney began, voice well-oiled with certainty, describing a pattern of medication discrepancies and irreparable breach of patient trust, and Brookside's cooperative internal review. He gestured to a stack of printed charts and an audit log of Pyxis meds. He said my son's name like a warning label. Then Brookside's counsel stood, young, crisp, the color of money around the edges. He mentioned his resume the way men like that can't help doing. He called on Victor Lang to testify. Victor walked to the stand. He didn't look at me when he raised his right hand. He didn't look at anyone except the judge. When asked to state his name, he said Victor Andrew Lang. And when asked if he knew Dr. Daniel Hill, he said, regrettably, then smiled in a way that asked to be forgiven for his kindness. He told the court how sad he was, so very sad, to take action against a promising young physician. But the hospital had no choice, because integrity demanded it. He described a shocking breach, a pattern of missing vials, a complaint from a family who felt their father was over-sedated. He told it slow and gentle, like he was reading a children's book he didn't write but admired. When it was my turn to cross, I stood up. Daniel's fingers tightened on the edge of our table and let go. "Sir," the judge said to me, "counsel for Dr. Hill will have an opportunity." I smiled. "Your Honor, I'm not counsel, just the mother of the accused." Judge Coleman looked at me over her glasses. "Ma'am, this is a formal proceeding." "Yes," I said. And because reputation has been dragged here by both ankles, I'd appreciate the court's indulgence for a single, initial sworn statement from the person who raised the man on that paper. Ma'am, the board attorney said, respectfully. Let her speak, the judge said, briefly. I moved to the lectern. I didn't bring a briefcase. Some tools you don't display. I took out a single sheet of paper and placed it face down. My name is Margaret Ann Hill, I said. I was a nurse for 30 years and a clinical quality officer for 6. I'm retired now. I carried crash carts and comfort and secrets. I wiped the fear from faces, and as any nurse in this room knows, I kept the unglamorous promises of medicine. I also co-founded Brookside Regional Hospital in 1999 with 3 other people whose names are on the brass near the elevators. 2 of them are dead. One of them is the man sitting over there. The room made a sound like a held breath finding its voice. Victor's head jerked. Your Honor? Sit down, Mr. Lang, the judge said quietly. I turned over the single sheet for the judge to see. It was a copy of a plaque inscription, the original hidden under a sponsored wing given a new donor's name. And because I promised my late husband I would never return to this building if it wasn't for something that could save our son, here I am. No one moved. No one coughed. Somewhere, a pen rolled, the plastic barrel hitting wood, the sound far away and small. I didn't ask questions I already knew the answers to. I let the silence do what it does when truth walks in without knocking. The young hospital lawyer tried to object to the presence of irrelevant personal history. The judge told him to sit down, and that relevance is a living thing. Victor adjusted his tie and did not look at me. Proceed, the judge said. I didn't, not yet, because stories don't work if you only tell the ending. People need to understand the beginning, or the justice part won't feel like justice. It will feel like luck. Luck isn't what brought me back to this room. So let me tell you where this really started. The week my son was born, Ohio smelled like hot corn and old tractors. Daniel came into the world with his fist clenched around nothing and the loudest cry on the block. His father closed his eyes and whispered thank you like it was a prayer, and for a while, it was. We were poor, the way you are in your 20s, and rich the way you are when you think the whole map belongs to you. We cooked on a secondhand stove and counted tips, and on Sundays, we walked past a vacant lot where a small hospital once stood, condemned now, pickets on the windows like eyelashes on a tired face. Someone should bring that back, my husband said. He was a respiratory therapist then, at St. Esther's across town, a place where people don't wait 9 hours to be seen. Someone with money, I said, or someone with stubborn, he smiled. And if you've ever been loved by a good man before addiction took him, you know how even nonsense can sound like the truth. It took us 10 years, and every favor, and a second mortgage wrapped around our throats. We begged. We hosted a spaghetti dinner that raised less than the cost of the sauce. We wrote letters. We asked 3 physicians with hearts bigger than their billing codes to dream out loud with us, and an elder attorney named Warner who'd done pro bono until the word lost its Latin and turned into a habit. I kept working double shifts, pocketing bruises no one sees, tucking away knowledge about supply chains and safety incidents and how to chart near misses so we could prevent real ones. We learned construction codes and the price of drywall and the strange way a building looks naked before the tile goes down. Brookside Regional opened with a balloon arch and a YMCA choir. We had 12 ER bays, 2 ORs, a cafeteria that made meatloaf the way the Methodist ladies wrote it down in 1953, a broom closet we turned into a quiet room for families who just heard bad news, and a chapel so small the janitor called it a chap. We had a cornerstone. We had hope. We had a guiding principle we wrote above the nurses' station. People first, paper second. It made the administrators roll their eyes, and I didn't care. My husband put up 6 years' worth of sleep, and then, like so many people who give themselves away cup by cup, he ran out of ways to refill. Oxy was the first thief, then lies, then shame. By the time I realized a man can drown on dry land, it was too late. He died in a motel room near the interstate with a Bible open near his left hand, as if he believed a little more light could push back all that dark. After we buried him, I stayed, because love for a place is an odd thing. It can be holier than love for a person and less forgiving. I stayed while the board changed its shape and the donor wall grew new names like Ivy, and the new CFO learned how to dress compassion in spreadsheets. I stayed while a man named Victor came in with the smooth talk of scalable partnerships, promising to unlock value while locking doors that shouldn't close. He smiled like everything he touched wanted to be touched by him. Brookside grew shiny. Safety didn't always follow. Nurses learned to click boxes faster than they could look into eyes. Quality became a slide deck, but people like me, the ones who still remembered how the lobby smelled the morning we welcomed our first patient, kept the old fire quietly, the way you cup a match in wind. The first time Victor and I fought in a boardroom, he said, "Maggie, you have to think like an executive." "I am," I said. An executive of oxygen, of honesty, of the last 5 minutes of a person's life and whether they feel alone while they're living them. When he realized he couldn't charm me, he did what men like him do. He tried to move me. Out of the way, out of the budget, out of the memory. He cut my department and gave me a consulting contract with less authority than a paperclip. I resigned 3 weeks later. I told myself I'd go home and plant tomatoes and stop checking my watch at 2 a.m. because someone's potassium was crashing. I told myself I was done. Then my son called me from a supply closet at 3:18 one morning. "Mom," he said. He'd been a hospitalist for 5 years by then, the kind who writes your grandmother's name carefully in the chart and knows which nurse's kid plays second base. "I think I'm being set up." "What did you touch?" I asked, because that's how an old nurse looks at every crisis. "What did you count? What did you sign?" "Pyxis anomalies," he said. 2 vials missing on my shift, then 4. I checked the logs, I triple-checked, I pulled printouts. Someone is editing after I chart, like time traveling with a keyboard. Who knows? Pharmacy officially. But half the floor knows unofficially because rumor moves faster than truth in a building with vents. Does Victor know? "Mom," he said, voice so tired. Victor probably had the dream this came from. We met at a diner that still believes breakfast is a love language. Daniel brought a manila folder with more paper than pancakes. He showed me timestamps that didn't align with narc waste slips and a night where the camera over the med room went out for maintenance. He told me about a 5-year cancer patient whose PCA pump was misprogrammed and a family who complained that their father slept through nearly every visit because some doctor oversedated him, and that doctor's name was my son. He told me about a nurse who cried in the laundry where she thought no one could hear, and a night manager who told everyone to stop gossiping about it, and a systems analyst who was suddenly on vacation. I listened. Then I asked the question that comes before all answers. Why? Daniel didn't look up from the paper. Because I objected to the new fast flow discharge metrics. In the last quality meeting, and because I wrote an incident about the med room camera, and because I exist. I laughed. He did too. It's a sound you make when you're trying not to drown. "Mom," he said after a while, "I know you promised Dad you wouldn't go back." "I did," I said. "I promised him I would only go back if it was to save you." He closed his eyes and rubbed them with the heels of his hands, a gesture he learned when calculus started giving him headaches. When he opened them, the manila folder between us looked smaller somehow, like the problem had condensed to something we might carry. The next week, Brookside terminated him for cause. 3 days after, the board petition landed. News travels faster than paper. Neighbors who'd borrowed sugar from me at Christmas started crossing the street when they saw me in Kroger. The lady at church who always sat behind me with headbands the color of Easter eggs asked how I was doing with a voice that meant, "I saw it online and I believe whatever felt best to believe right then." Our mortgage company didn't call because algorithmic cruelty is a courtesy you can't cross-examine. I waited. Sometimes patience is not passive. It's a weapon. You want to find out who planted a landmine? Step slowly and watch who gets nervous. That's how we came to this morning in this courtroom, with Victor asking the air why I'm here. I didn't ask the judge for the right to cross-examine him. That would come. Instead, I asked for permission to call my first witness. Not an expert, not a nurse, not a pharmacist. A janitor. A man with gentle hands and tennis shoes stood and walked forward in a uniform so clean it made you believe in standards. His name was Harold Benton. He'd worked at Brookside 21 years. He'd seen 1,000 beginnings and endings and not a single thank you that lasted longer than a Wink Martindale rerun. "Mr. Benton," I said, "do you ever fix things when they break?" He smiled small. "Every day, ma'am." "Do you remember the night the medroom camera on 4 West went dark?" "Yes, ma'am." "How do you remember it?" "Because maintenance calls come through me after 9 p.m., and when I got up there to check the panel, power was fine. The cord was unplugged from the ceiling run, not accidental, and the door was propped. I'm not allowed to touch the devices, but I logged the time and called facilities." "What time did you log?" 2:27 a.m., the board attorney objected. "Relevance." I asked Harold one more question. "Sir, did anyone ever ask you to change that time on your log?" He looked down. "Yes, ma'am." "Who?" He swallowed and said the name of a man who reported to a woman who reported to a man who held Victor's calendar. The judge leaned forward. Overruled. While the court processed what unplugged can mean, I asked permission to play a short clip from a hallway camera 1 floor down that, as far as IT was concerned, had nothing to do with the medroom outage. It showed a nurse badge tapping a side door at 2:34 a.m. with a cart that wasn't on that floor inventory. The timestamp matched a supply anomaly on 4 West. The nurse on the video was the same person who had filed the complaint letter against my son, claiming over-sedation. If you think this is a coincidence, you don't know hospital politics. The board attorney rose. "We haven't seen this." "No," I said, "because you asked for the camera above the med room, not the one by the linen chute. Sometimes truth stands beside what you're looking for and waits for you to turn your head." The judge asked logistics questions. The clerk toggled frames. The board attorney stammered about chain of custody, a phrase men use when they realize the problem with their case isn't provenance, but courage. Victor tried to smile again. His face remembered how, but his eyes did not. "Mr. Lang," I said when it was time to cross him properly, "how many pharmacy technicians work the night shift?" "2, he said. "Sometimes 1 with an on-call." "How many audits do you personally review?" "I have a team." "How many do you personally review?" "Periodic snapshots," he said, "on a dashboard." "Can you read a dashboard, Mr. Lang?" "That's insulting." "It's precise. Do you know that the anomaly rate in med logging jumped by 260% in the 6 weeks after you rolled out your new discharge time goals? That's meaningless correlation or meaningful causation. Did you investigate? We hired a consultant. You hired a firm that shares an outside counsel with your hospital network parent company. You commissioned a report that blames a doctor you plan to fire and a unit you plan to close. "Ma'am," he said, "with respect, you're not an expert. I'm a nurse and a founder and a mother. I know what a missing vial looks like, and I know what a missing spine looks like, which is what you grow when profit introduces itself as destiny." The judge didn't stop me. She didn't have to. Truth has a way of pacing itself when it knows it will be allowed to finish a sentence. I took a breath and did the hardest thing I came to do. I called my own son to the stand. Daniel walked like an honest man looks when someone gives him a stage he never wanted. He took the oath. He answered the board attorney's questions with careful, spare words. When asked if he ever diverted narcotics, he said no. When asked if he ever over-sedated a patient, he said no. When asked if he ever took a single vial without logging it, he said no, then looked at me like he wanted permission to say more. "Tell the court," I said when it was my turn, "about Mr. Klein in 412B. Daniel nodded. Mr. Klein was 79 with metastatic colon cancer. His daughter wanted him awake to talk, and his wife wanted him to rest. The family argued in whispers that were louder than most people shout. The night in question, his pain spiked. We dialed the PCA down and switched to scheduled oral, then up-titrated back to get him comfortable. I charted every change. I sat with him at 3 a.m. and told him the story my mother told me when I was little, about how when you're scared of the dark, you should name the shape of things so you know what you're looking at. He fell asleep. He died 3 days later, on a day shift. "Were you the attending that day?" "No," Daniel said. So the complaint letter from the family about the night doctor who knocked him out for his last days was mistaken about time and person. "It was mistaken," he said, "and grieving. I don't hold grief's mistakes against people." "Did the hospital?" I asked. He looked at Victor, then back at me. "They held it against me, or used it like it was a spoon to stir something they already planned to serve." I let the room sit with that. You should never rush a sentence that tells the truth about the way institutions use other people's tears. During lunch recess, I sat with my son on a bench by the window. Snow flurries fell like confetti for a celebration nobody had planned. He put his head in his hands and didn't cry. There's a kind of dry weeping mothers can hear. I put my arm around him and told him something that is true and old and always new. Justice is slow, but it can learn to run. When we returned, I called my last witness, an old man with a cane and a bow tie the color of robins, Attorney Warner. He walked like he'd argued cases in rooms where the air was thicker than this. He took the stand. He told the court in the most boring voice you could use to deliver a miracle that he had discovered a sealed agreement from 2001, tucked in an archived file for a building permit amendment. The agreement assigned temporary power of attorney to me as co-founder in the event of a material breach of patient safety ethics to ensure that the hospital could be guided back to its mission without delay. The agreement was signed by 4 founders, 2 of whom, as I said, are dead. The third is me. The fourth was a young administrator then, a man named Victor Andrew Lang, who used to sit on milk crates with us and eat cupcakes from the volunteer bake sale and say things like, "Isn't this something? Look at what we're building." Victor stood. "That's nonsense. That's defunct. That's expired." Warner lifted an eyebrow. "It has no sunset clause." The judge asked careful questions. She reviewed dates. She looked at Victor over her glasses with the same face she'd given me that morning, and I liked her for that. She asked me one question. "Mrs. Hill, why didn't you use this sooner?" "Because you don't swing a hammer at someone you used to love," I said, "even when they've become a wall. You knock, you wait, you hope. And then when someone tries to crush your child under the pieces, you remember what a hammer is for." The board attorney asked for a continuance to review. The judge denied. She said patient safety is not a file you leave on the corner of your desk over the weekend. She said the standard of proof at an emergency hearing is urgency, plus credibility. She said a mother's word is not evidence, but in context, it's a map. She said she would rule by 5. We waited in a hallway that smelled like cold paper again. Nurses passed us with coffee cups and quick eyes, and one of them, a woman in her 20s with a bun that had given up, slipped a folded note into my hand and kept walking. I opened it. "Thank you for saying out loud what we whisper in the break room." At 10 minutes to 5, the doors opened. We stood. The judge spoke simply. The board's petition was denied. Dr. Hill's license remained active. The court ordered an independent audit of Brookside's med logs from the last 9 months, a third-party review of camera outages and backdoor badges, and a temporary appointment of an outside patient safety officer to oversee narcotics handling and discharge metrics. The court also referred the testimony about log tampering to the county prosecutor's office. The judge fixed Victor with a look that remembered his face from the morning and told him that hospitals are holy, and that if he'd forgotten, he was about to remember. Victor sat down slowly. He looked at me for the first time all day. The smile was gone and the wristwatch face underneath it. He didn't look angry. He looked like a man standing in front of a door he never thought he'd have to open without a key. We walked out into a blue evening that made the snow look like breath. My son's shoulders lowered. He put his hand over his mouth and shook. Then he laughed a little. Then he covered his eyes. I let him do all the things a man does when he stops pretending not to feel. We went home and warmed up chicken soup and called Daniel's wife, who had taken Lily to dance class so she wouldn't sit and Google things no 8-year-old should Google about her father. We didn't celebrate. We didn't say, "We won." We didn't say, "They lost." We said, "Tomorrow." And for a family that had been living day by day, that word felt like a gold coin with weight. The audit began. The hospital tried to throttle it. The hospital failed. There are some snakes you shouldn't pick up because they know how to bite through pocket lining. The independent team found 42 time edits in narc logs that violated policy, 6 unexplained camera outages covering med rooms and side corridors, and a neat little overlap between discharge targets and the night shift's coincidental spikes in waste. They found that the nurse who filed the complaint letter about Mr. Klein had been counseled 3 times for documentation errors. They found that the systems analyst, on vacation, had booked a trip paid by a vendor who sells software that makes dashboards look like constellations. I didn't attend those meetings. That isn't how victories like this work. You show up for the heat and you go home when the light starts to do its job. Still, someone had to decide whether a hospital stays a hospital. Someone had to hold the paper where it belongs, second place. A town can survive many things. It cannot survive the death of a place where the sick are seen, with eyes that do not look past them. The board convened a special session. It was closed door. We don't have to guess what was said in there because 3 people called me afterward, one in tears, one drunk with relief, one still whispering. They removed Victor. They asked me to accept a 3-month appointment as interim patient safety officer under the old authority Warner dusted off. They asked if I would take a stipend. I told them to give the money to the night shift for now, in overtime and hot food, and we would talk later. They told me that wasn't how it worked. I told them it was how it would work this once. They agreed because they remembered what it feels like to be human in a building full of charts. I went back to Brookside for the first time officially in 10 years. The lobby looked bigger. The donor wall had more names. The volunteers had new smocks. The coffee was worse. The nurses looked the same because the faces change and the eyes do not. They welcomed me the way people welcome rain after a long forecast of maybe. We changed the way med counts were audited. We put a second camera on the corner of the corner you think no one watches. We slowed discharges when safety asked us to slow. We did not apologize to Invisible Metrics for choosing breathing people instead. We retrained 3 units in waste protocol and called it a reset, not a punishment, because people try harder when you tell them they are worth the effort. One afternoon, I stood in the chap and stared at the thin wooden cross. I asked God for nothing. Asking is what I'd been doing for a year. I simply said thank you, because I was still standing and my son was still wearing his name on a badge and a town still had a place to go in the middle of the night when the heat in a baby's forehead scares young parents into learning how fragile everything is. If I stop here, you might think stories end when judges rule and audits fix. They don't. Stories end when people decide what they learned. If no one decides, the next page writes itself without you, and it doesn't care whether you like the plot. A month later, I saw Victor in a grocery aisle between ketchup and mustard. He looked older. It happens fast when your face stops being the face the photographer's lights were built for. He started to say something. I lifted a hand and shook my head. "I don't need an apology," I said. "You do, but not from me." He made a sound that might have been a laugh in another life. "You always did think you were better than the rest of us." "No," I said. "I always knew the work was." I walked away. People who mistake your spine for snobbery will follow you to the produce and try again. He didn't. He left the cart there. He left it full of condiments he no longer needed. On an evening in late March, my granddaughter Lily asked if I would come to school and talk about what nurses do, second grade career night. I told her I would if I could tell the truth, that nurses do the work everyone assumes someone else will do, and sometimes they do it while someone calls them sweetie, and sometimes they do it while someone tries to cut their hours, and sometimes they do it while they hold a man's hand while he dies because his wife couldn't get there in time, and sometimes they do it while a man in a suit thinks nurses are a variable you can adjust without breaking a heart. Lily said that sounded like a lot. I said we can say, we help people not be scared and let the rest unfold when it needs to. She asked me if her dad would be there, and I said yes. He would be in the front row, still a man who believes the dark has shapes you can name. I'm telling you all this because someone out there right now is where I was last fall. You are being told to be quiet because quiet is polite, and polite is easier to crush. You are being told the problem is your tone when the problem is someone's plan. You are being told to think like an executive when what they mean is, forget you are a person. You do not have to forget. You do not have to be quiet. You can be precise and loud at the same time. You can hold a single sheet of paper and a lifetime of receipts and walk into a room where a man who knows your name asks why you came. You can say, because my child is here. Because my town is here, because I was here when this place was a dream, and I refused to wake up to find out it turned into a ledger. On my last day as interim, I took a walk down 4 West, past the med room whose new camera blinked its little red light like a heartbeat. Harold was buffing the floor. He lifted the machine brush so I could pass and tipped his chin the way men do when what they want to say is too big for words. Mr. Benton, I said, do me a favor. Yes, ma'am. If anyone ever asks you to change a time again, say no. If they push, tell them Margaret will come down and make a scene. He laughed. Yes, ma'am. I left Brookside at 10 past midnight through the side door near the linen chute where the camera sees everything. Snow fell again. Ohio in March can't make up its mind. I stood there in the cold and thought about the plaque with my name under a donor overlay and the tiny chapel where I learned how to say thank you without asking for anything else. I thought about my husband, the way he used to count ribs during CPR like numbers were a rope you could throw to a drowning man. I thought about Daniel, who still calls me on nights he doesn't need to, but can't help wanting to hear the voice of someone who will tell him the shapes in the dark. At home, I made tea and left the light on. When my son's car pulled into the driveway and he came in and kissed my cheek and stood in my kitchen like a man whose name hadn't been taken from him, I felt a kind of peace I had not felt since the day the balloon arch went up, and we opened our doors and this town walked in and we promised to be what we said we would be. I'm not naive. I know how quickly good things can be sold to the highest bidder with a story that makes theft sound like a gift. I know how even honest men can lose their way between a breakfast meeting and a budget vote. I know how grief makes liars out of people who don't know where else to put their hurt. But I also know something else, something I want you to know too. Truth is patient. It is not bashful. It waits by the linen chute camera. It writes the time in a janitor's log. It sits beside a dying man and listens to his breath and names the shape of the dark. It goes home when the judge says denied and comes back when a board remembers a promise it signed when it still had baby fat on its cheeks. It looks a man in the grocery aisle in the face and says, I don't need anything from you, because it already has everything it needs. If you're listening to me from your car during your lunch break or from a couch where you sat down because life called a timeout you didn't plan, I want to say this clearly. You are not too small to matter and you are not too late to help. You can protect the people you love and the places that made you who you are. You can show up when the doors open and the room goes quiet. You can be the reason someone like my son keeps his name. The morning after my interim ended, I took a bus to the edge of town where there's a flea market that sells things nobody needs and one thing everybody does, reminders. I found a picture frame just big enough for a single sheet of paper. I printed the inscription from the old plaque and slid it in. The paper just a little crooked because perfection is a lie and I'm done telling lies. I hung it in my kitchen above the place where I keep the tea. When Lily asked what it was, I told her. When she asked why people cover up names, I said because sometimes people forget where they came from. When she asked if I would ever let anyone cover up mine again, I said no. She nodded like a person who will grow up to hold a hammer correctly. Low on the handle, firm. That night, we had meatloaf, the Methodist recipe. Daniel washed the dishes. I dried. We didn't talk about hospitals. We talked about the robin we saw in the yard and whether Ohio would skip spring and jump to summer, and whether Grandpa would have liked Lily's dance recital. He would have. He would have cried like fathers do when their hearts haven't hardened. He would have kissed my hand in the car on the way home, in gratitude for something I did that didn't look like heroism and was. When the house was quiet, I sat with a pen that sets off courthouse wands and wrote a note to myself on the back of a grocery list. If anyone ever asks you why you are here, tell them. Because I helped build this place, and because my son still lives here, and because truth never left. The next morning, I taped the note to the inside of my purse. I don't need it to remember. I need it for the moment the room goes silent and the world asks again. It will ask. It always does. And when it does, I will answer the way I did the day Victor forgot who I was. I will answer with the voice you're hearing now. Calm, clear, certain. Because there are people in this world who believe power is the same thing as purpose. They confuse profit for proof. They forget that hospitals are made of people, not numbers, and that numbers will lie to you when you're scared. They forget that every chart is a person and every person is a story, and every story has a mother. And a mother, when necessary, will walk through any door, into any room, look any man in the face, and say, "I'm here." Now tell me again, slowly this time, why you think I should leave.